On the evening of June the 5th, 1944, the greatest fleet the world has ever known sailed from the shores of southern England. While great air forces swept the skies above, it carried the soldiers safely across 100 miles of perilous sea. At dawn the next day, guns of the Allied fleets opened the assault on the beaches of Normandy. The army seized the beaches and poured inland. But the tremendous problem of communication and supply still remained. For those who planned the invasion, this had always been a major problem, which could only be overcome if a port was captured in the first few days of the campaign. There were plenty of good ports on the French coast: Boulogne, Le Havre, Cherbourg, and the rest. They were the gateways into the continent. But the Germans knew it. Hold the ports, they said, and we hold Europe. So they fortified them against attack by sea and land, and were prepared to destroy them completely, rather than let any one of them fall into our hands. They believed that before we could capture a port, the changeable Channel weather would cut off our army from its food, oil, and ammunition. The weather, as well as the Germans, could be our enemy. In May 1942, Mr. Churchill wrote a memorandum on the subject of piers for beaches. A harbor was essential, but if we could not capture one, then we must build our own. But it takes years to build a harbor. Dover, for instance, took 7 years. How could we build a much greater harbor than Dover in a matter of days and under fire from enemy guns? There was but one solution. And at Quebec in August 1943, the main principles of this daring and fantastic project were agreed upon. We would build great harbor units in England, tow them across the sea, and set them down during the battle off the Normandy coast. In the autumn of 1943, building began. In ports and harbors, in shipyards and factories all over England, sections of the vast harbor began to take shape. Over 30,000 men were at work on strange, monstrous structures of which they could not be told the purpose. 500,000 tons of concrete alone went to the building of these mammoths. As D-Day approached, all these parts of the great harbor to be were launched, then towed in great secrecy to the assembly place whence they would be taken across to France. The place chosen for this port was the little Normandy town of Arromanches, where surveys and soundings had been secretly taken weeks before D-Day. The Royal Engineers were already ashore making a survey of the beach while the battle went on a few miles behind the town. The first part of the operation consisted of sinking old ships which were now making their last voyage under their own steam. They were sunk with explosive charges. The first went down on the afternoon of D+1. Towards evening, a second ship was sunk. Their purpose was to give immediate shelter to small craft and to form the first part of the harbor breakwater. In 4 days, 15 old ships were sunk. 15 old ships whose last hours were perhaps their greatest. Ashore, the engineers blew great gaps in the west wall, made roads, and carried out demolitions. Bulldozers cleared the roads for the lorries which would roll ashore later. The shore-end sections of the piers, each some 480 feet long, were towed into position opposite the gaps already blasted by the engineers. Each section of pier was held in position by steel cables, which were run out to anchors by specially constructed boats. Other sections were then joined on, making a flexible floating causeway, which rose and fell with the tide. Along this causeway, the engineers laid a steel road, strong enough to carry the heaviest vehicles. At the same time, to extend the line of sunken ships, breakwaters were laid. These concrete structures, each weighing 7,000 tons, had been towed across the channel. Some 200 tugs were engaged on this job alone. As they were brought into position, the valves were opened and the sea rushed in. The great mass of concrete slowly settled down on the ocean bed, forming a great wall against the sea.